Cricket boards actually make watching their games almost impossible now. I spend almost as much time trying to find where I can view it as I do actually following the action. That is why I use NordVPN. They let me find all the cricket I want to watch while protecting me from the nasty side of the internet. Nord will free your cricket matches. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/good areas to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months on top. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Watch every match with NordVPN. Welcome to Good Areas Podcast. I'm Jarrod Kimber. We have the Wagon Wheel for you today, the show where we answer your questions on cricket. The best way, of course, of supporting us at any stage is to help us out via Patreon. So if you can find a Good Areas Podcast over at Patreon, you'll be able to find all of our stuff there, and you can do the Discord channel, and people seem to love the Discord channel. Don't know if I've been on it today. I'm certainly on it yesterday. But I'm there most days. It's almost the only social media I want. So if you want to hang out with me on social media, and I don't know why anyone would, but if you do, that's the place to go. If you're watching live on YouTube, of course, you want to ask questions on this. Super chats are the best way to go. But the Patreon questions are the ones we answer first. Like this one from Rudra, who says, since 2010, what are the top 5 best test teams for a single year? I would have India 2019, South Africa 2013, England 2011, and then I'm not sure. Probably there's an Australian team and New Zealand team, or I'm missing anyone obvious. To be honest, I don't really look at it by year. It's an interesting one. I probably more look at it by era, right? And so you'd be looking at, because in a year you can play have a bunch of good wickets that suit you or play a bunch of poor sides. But yeah, there would certainly be an Australian year or a New Zealand year in there, but that's not really how I put my thought process together. So I don't think I have a great answer for that. The World Test Championship is obviously quite flawed, but the idea of sort of having the 2 years makes a lot more sense. I'm looking at 3 years when I'm looking at a team, and then you're looking at maybe the last 18 months if you're looking at form. So yeah, I don't have an answer to that because I don't think it's in any way how I would look at a side. But I get your point, and you probably picked a few. There must be an Australian or a New Zealand side, as you said, in there as well. Raoul says, obviously, all of us are well aware that the wobble ball and its current dominance in Test cricket. However, I don't really hear commentary coverage mention it much. Often they will still mention swing, seam position, overhead conditions when bowlers are using the wobble ball. Why do you think this is too nerdy for mainstream coverage? I think I always used to have this problem where someone would say that's an off cutter or that's a leg cutter, and that's not what they meant. An off cutter and a leg cutter involves you tweaking the ball. And quite often when a bowler was seaming the ball one direction or the other, it was just hitting the seam. So sometimes we do simplify things on TV or on radio, when we are making coverage of that. There's certainly a big, most of the problems I've had with the wobble ball have been from older players who were just like, this always existed, Jarrod. We don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, but I've been watching cricket for the last 15 years, like 17 years as a professional, day in, day out, all around the world. It wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. It was happening for 2 players. It was happening for 5 players. It was happening for 3 bowlers in every attack. Like there's a big change. And I think it's a little bit, you do start to hear, and I think Stuart Broad might have said this for one of Mitchell Stark's balls the other day. It was a wobble ball there. So we are starting to hear it a little bit more. It's actually not as cool as saying in swing, out swing, off cut, leg cut, right? Like I think because a wobble ball could do multiple things at once. But I think, the way that we try and do it when I'm on radio, well, certainly when I'm on radio, is I try and say that's the wobble ball that's come back in, or that's the wobble ball that's gone away, all right? And there isn't actually always that much description of the ball, but I think we can do a little bit better with that. But yeah, I do also, I know it sounds weird, but it's only of recent times that we've actually started calling it the wobble ball. So the wobble ball was wobble seam delivery. It was scrambled seam. So it's even had multiple names when you have a look at that all the way through. So nothing's that straightforward. But I don't think this is that much different to what we've seen before. It takes a while for cricket language and cricket commentary to kind of catch up with what's happening on the field. That's pretty common, I'd say. Bloody says Eden Gardens last hosted a test in 2019, Bangladesh. The venue historically had a reputation for favouring seam bowling. Around when did this stop? Do you have any favourite seam bowling performances at the ground? I don't know when it stopped. I wonder. I wonder if that might have been just a groundsman or two. Maybe different soil content. Sometimes you change pitches and just the new pitch doesn't do the same. My favorite seam bowling performance at Eton Garden. I'm trying to think. Was it a Ghana or a Holding? I've got a feeling of one of them doing really, really well at that ground. But yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. Person says, at what point does South Africa need to succeed for them to get more test matches, whether at home or away? Or are they already there and just a question of waiting for the next round? Or do they need to have a longer period of success before the big three host more matches against them? It's not about succeeding. That's the best thing that you need to understand. I think people think about this the wrong way. There's this whole idea that we're going to save test cricket by having great test matches. We had a really good 50 over World Cup. 50 over cricket's still in danger. Getting the replacement balls in ain't going to save nothing. It is not going to change the trajectory of 50 over cricket. Test cricket has been more entertaining over the last 7 or so years, and we are struggling to fit it in as it is, right? The issue is that South Africa doesn't make money for anyone. That's the problem. So maybe if they become everyone's second favorite team, but New Zealand's everyone's second favorite team. So you have to make money for people. Unfortunately, that's where it's going. Rob says, where do you rank South Africa's World Test Championship win in upset wins in tests? For a 25% chance, they won comfortably in the end after bowling out Australia for about 200 in both innings. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that big of an upset if it's a 25% chance. India are a 33% chance in the next test. And I don't think we'd be shocked if India won that test, would we, Rob? So I didn't sit there going it was a huge upset. Before the game, I was pretty clear that I thought the odds were wrong and that South Africa had a much better chance of winning than the 25% chance anyway. Hopefully some of you got in on that because you can get them at 4s. So I was pretty clear that they had a chance. So I wouldn't have said it was a massive upset. But they weren't favourites, and they were, considerably away from being favourites. I'd say that's fair. But no, I don't think it's like one of the best upsets of all time or anything like that. The fact that they won it comfortably is interesting, but how comfortably did they win it? Like they won it with 5 wickets to spare. I don't know. Let's say, I'm trying to think of one of the other things that could have happened. If Markram or Bavuma were caught early on, they might have won it 6 or 7 wickets down. They might not have won it all as well. So I didn't think it was like they won it easily. They just won it comfortably in the end. It was pretty tense in the ground. Ben says, how does coloured team batting equipment work in franchise leagues? Each player is sponsored, but who colours the gloves and the pads? Oh, okay. Is it the sponsor of the team? Do the players keep their kit now unless for all other So I want to give you the exact answer, but this is my memory of it, and I'm pretty sure this is true. So apologies if this is wrong. There is a color scheme that is given. So when you play for a team, you have to contact someone at the team and get the exact color scheme of the kit for that year. I think they also do it if there's multiple kits, but I'm not as positive about this. But certainly if there's the main kit, so there'll be, like a color code that they want. So the team will say, okay, let's say we're wearing hot pink, right? But we want our pads and our gloves to be purple to match, to match the pink. That will be the color that they will send. And then that will then be forwarded on to all the kit manufacturers. Usually it's done through your agents if you're a top level player. If you're a little bit lower down, it might not be. And then that color is given to the sponsors, and the sponsors produce the kit for that. And the kit is quite often sent straight to the team rather than the player directly. just because it's easier to ship everything out. And there might be two or three players that they might be dealing with or whatever that may be. And means the player doesn't have to take stuff with them, blah, blah, blah. That's, I've seen that happen. There might be other variations of that that I'm not sure about. But yeah, and then the players generally, if you're around for the last game, the last thing, players will give stuff to family, to friends. Sometimes you'll see that they'll give it away to crowd members and everything else. So towards the end, I think it's quite famous in county cricket that if you can kind of turn up for the last game, you get lots of kit. That's the same if you can turn up to the last blast game for teams or whatever. And I would say that would be the same in some other leagues as well. Not 100% sure. I can't remember what happened in the CPL. But no one left stuff around the room. It wasn't like it was just there because I thought that's what would happen. But everyone took most of their stuff with them, so they must have been giving it to people they knew. And sometimes it just goes to other players that like need kit. Siddharth says, with the MLC happening at the same time as Vitality Blast, do you think most international players would choose to play MLC over the Vitality Blast? Yeah, definitely. Vitality Blast is a second tier competition, Siddharth. There are reasons far beyond financial why players pick teams. I've heard of players not picking to play with Guyana and taking less money in the Blast because their family wanted to spend time in Manchester or Brighton or wherever it may be, rather than spending time in Guyana. So you might have sponsorships, you might have family, you might have friends, etc., etc. But generally, you pick the bigger league and the bigger paycheck. And so the bigger league at the moment is the MLC. If you're getting paid more to play in the Blast, you might pick the Blast. But if you're just asking if it's just you get offered 50 grand in both, I would say most people will pick the MLC. Players are obsessed by America. They want to be involved. Usman Khawaja once said that Xavier Bartlett is a great talent with the bat, as much as with the ball. Do you see him becoming an all-rounder at any stage? No. I'm not saying he has zero batting chops. I'm just looking up his number here. So first class cricket, he averages 19. It's only 500 runs. T20 cricket, he averages 17 with a strike rate of 120. He's 26. He's been working on his bowler to become a professional bowler for a long time. It wouldn't surprise me if at 29, 30, 31, he's a better batter than he is now. I'd have to go back and look at like a Paul Rifle record. Paul Rifle is a guy who's probably, I think, could have been an all-rounder. And what was his batting record in the end? He ended up averaging 26 in Test cricket, 24 in first-class cricket. And I reckon he averages more in Test cricket because when he was playing Tests, he was at his best with the bat. God, he never made a professional 100. Paul Rifle. Never. God, I thought he was a much better player than that. But his averages hold up. So, and I saw him play for Victoria a lot. I would have thought he would have made 200 or 300s. Probably didn't play enough county cricket. And he batted a little bit down the order for Victoria at times as well, just because they had so many other all-round options. But I would have thought that if you go back and have a look at him, I don't think his batting really held up when he first came. And then as he matured, when he gets to 26, 27, 28, is my memory of him, he suddenly just became this much better player and started making lots of runs. And he had a couple of like periods where he was really hard to get out. I'm trying to think if it was towards the end of his career. Yeah, around 97. He averages 52 in Test cricket in 97. And it was smashing the ball. And I think that was the best version of Paul Rifle. And it probably just took a little bit longer to develop at times. And it wasn't as consistent at times just because he was trying to make it as a test bowler. And it's very hard to do both. I think that's very true. I would suggest don't try and do both. Ali says, it seems like this World Test Championship final was worth more from the narrative perspective. Would teams take it more seriously now and plan better to reach the finals? Is this the 87 equivalent of a World Cup? No, India were quite desperate for it beforehand. New Zealand were quite desperate for it. Sri Lanka took it really seriously. I mean, isn't England the only team who doesn't take it seriously? I mean, I could be wrong. Every other team, official player, whatever I've talked to from another country has already taken it quite seriously. So I don't want to say I'd be shocked, but outside of England, I don't really know anyone who doesn't take it seriously. So I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one. It's not like the 87 World Cup. The 87 World Cup is very different because what you have there is the players are not taking that format seriously, right? They're not even taking it serious. Some countries are not even taking. England didn't take it seriously until the late 1990s, right? We don't have a big boom in even Australia and New Zealand taking it massively seriously until the 90s. Everyone sees it as the lower level of cricket. That's not the case with Test cricket, and so maybe sometimes the competition is not taken seriously, but all the games are still taken seriously. So it's very different from, like, I don't know, you're playing in Packers series and it's a Tuesday night and you're New Zealand and you're playing Sri Lanka or something, right? And everything, and maybe Sri Lanka or New Zealand, one of them can't qualify for the final already, whatever. That's really different than a Test match, in the 80s and 90s. So no, I don't think that holds up, Ali. From certainly from my chats with people involved in the game. Not everyone buys into it, of course, but yeah, but everyone buys into every Test match. Quick break, and we'll be back after this with more Wagon Wheel. Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs, and Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting. Oh, still got Ali's question up. You would have thought during that entire ad break I would have just pressed a button, but I didn't. Mob says, Australia lost the 2025 World Test Championship final to a South Africa, which came back to score the highest innings in the fourth innings. Why is no one using the word choke here about Australia? I think mostly, Mob, just because the pitch changed. I think that's the main reason. They had 3 chances to win that game, Australia, before the fourth innings, really. Am I right in saying that? No. So they had Smith going out was the first one. Usman and Marnus opening up was the second one. And then I suppose the Rickleton wicket at the start of the other one. Australia's won like a billion different things, and the conditions changed, and so the match changed from that point of view. I still think if you play back that chase quite a few times, like I've watched it on MV Play 3 times, that chase. There's a big video that we just did on it. I was really fascinated by it. Watching it live and then going back on MV Play and watching it again. I think if you play it back the way that Australia went about it, they probably would have won that game. I don't know what percentage of the time, but a pretty good percentage. But the conditions had changed enough that it was way more in South Africa's favour. I wonder if that's not South Africa batting in that innings, how differently we would have looked at that chase. The Tooth says, does bringing the slips up on a low pitch like the World Test Championship make sense, or is it better to go to a leg side field and target the stumps more? Well, they did both. They had a leg slip in as well. Was it the right move for Australia given their bowling attack? So both teams did it. So this is one of those things where we spend longer looking at it, but South Africa had their slips up really close. The one that almost killed Marco Janssen. He was so close on that one. I remember seeing it and just like trying to do the measurements with my eyes going, I can't remember ever seeing anyone in that position so close before. He was more like a short catching gully than he was a third slip. So both teams knew that this was an issue and they were going for it. I think it made sense. It just didn't work. If Smith had pouched that one, you probably wouldn't be asking that question, and it would have been a fantastic catch. But the vast, I said on the end of day 2, or was it at the end of day 3? But I think it was the end of day 2. I was already saying so many balls are falling short of slips here. They're going to have to do something. So I think it was in day 2. So I can't really complain that both teams tried a tactic. It didn't particularly work, but you can understand it. But they did bowl straight, and they did go for LBWs. They just didn't get the really low bounce. And even when it was low, it wasn't particularly fast. And they weren't shooters. They were just a little bit low. Ali says, why wouldn't the ICC organize a T20 franchise tournament and give part of the earnings to boards as well? Because the boards don't want them to, Ali. Because that means the boards would have to give the ICC more power and be involved with their baby. The boards see the franchise leagues as their babies. So that's why. That one's an easy one. Will says, leaving to one side the patootie dimension of the controversy, and I the only one who just doesn't like the Anderson-Tendulkar pairing. Surely the whole point of the Botham Richards or Border Gavaskar is that they had a relationship with each other as active players. Anderson Coley would ring truer, in my opinion. So I think Anderson bowled 500 balls to Sachin. Feels like a lot of balls to me, Will, but I get your point. It's not, thousands and thousands. So what would Gavaskar is 87, so he has a good decade with Border. Don't know how often they played against India, Australia though at that point. Although there would also have been limited overs games. Obviously, the Botham Richards one is a little bit different. I think that they just picked the two most famous players. Well, I don't think we need to overthink this all that much. I'm not sure this name lasts either. Maybe because it's got Tendulkar on it doesn't change. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's a I would not be surprised at all if this one didn't last and we saw a change on that as well. So yeah, they just haven't quite got it right, probably is the best way of looking at this. Let me just take another break because I'm just having a small issue with my computer, and I will be back in a moment. South Africa did not choke. In 1906, South Africa needed 284 to win. They'd only passed 100 in half their test innings at that point. At 105 for 6, it seemed impossible. They fought back but lost another flurry, leaving 45 to win with 1 wicket in hand. At the crease was Dave Norse, who was a capable batter, and he was joined by Percy Sherwell, the only debutant captain keeper and number 11 in Test cricket history. And these two were doing it. A huge crowd in South Africa cheered on every single run. With 8 left, Sherwell edged between slips for 4. Straight after, Norse ran a 3. England bowled 3 dots. All they needed was 1 wicket to tie. Instead, a leg side full toss, boundary, game over. This was Test cricket's first 1-wicket win, and their last partnership was a record for almost 100 years. But it was also something else. This was the first Test match that South Africa had ever won. Buy my book on Amazon, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. All right, welcome back. Hopefully I fixed that problem, and we can continue. Probably done too many. Maybe my laptop's too hot. It's so warm in the UK, surprisingly, today, and I've been recording all day. Certain Team says, I notice your content consistently presents a global perspective, unlike many other prominent journalists and authors whose work often reflects a national bias fan vibe. How do you manage this? I like cricket more than I like my country. I don't really buy into nationalism as a concept. I've talked about this so many times before, but I happen to be born in a random place. I feel like I have more in common with the people of the sort of Melbourne and the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and the country area just outside of that, Whittlesea, King Lake area, than I do with people from Western Australia or Tasmania. I probably have more in common with random people who've grown up in Chennai or Wellington or, I don't know, Mogadishu than I do in Australia. I just don't understand the whole idea of it. It's so arbitrary. Australia existed before, like, as in Australia, forget the name, but the area existed before and after. Australia was almost a country that had New Zealand as the other state, right? And Western Australia was going to be an independent country. Like, it's just a bunch of organizations before I was born making decisions. I understand why people get very fired up about nationalism and everything else, but, like, I don't know. It seems a bit nonsensical to me. So that's one big part of it. The other thing is that most cricket journalists, media, whatever you may be, are hired to broadcast or to write for their market, right? So why would they not be thinking about that? Like, if you're an English cricket journalist, you're writing for an English cricket newspaper, that's where like 80% of your energy is going to be like, what do English fans want here? There might be 20% where you're like, I want to get this right so that the online doesn't have a problem, or some other country does, I want to make it whatever. But you basically go, what does the English cricket fan want to read at the moment or want to listen to? That that makes sense. That's their job, and I think people misunderstand that. That is the case. And so if you work for Cricinfo, and you don't get this with CricBuzz, right? Because CricBuzz is more Indian focused. But if you work for Cricinfo, your job is to work out what cricket fans want, right? Now, I think I was already on that beforehand, but most of us who worked at Cricinfo would probably have a second or a third info there. Their national team wasn't even their favorite team, right? But we were also working in an environment where we had to think about what cricket fans wanted. So it's a very different way of going about it. I just don't give a shit about countries at all. Like, these are made up borders, mostly by colonial powers that are just bullshit, right? I mean, my favorite border story in cricket is the fact that there is a border that runs down the middle of the Hindu Kush Mountains. And on one side you have Pakistanis, and on the other side you have Afghanistanis. But the other side of Afghanistan, people are not that similar to the people who are in the Hindu Kush. And other parts of Pakistan, they're not as similar to the people who are in the Hindu Kush. Yet those two people are from two different countries. Why? Drew a line, the Durand line, right? We've ended up with two test playing nations out of it, so cricket's done quite well. But it's nonsensical. So how could you, I just don't understand how people care about that. Once you understand how these lines were drawn, it's bullshit. So it's easy for me to do it, but, not everyone's like me. Mob says, which cricketer in real life is least like their image in media or popular culture? Example, perhaps KP is actually really humble, or some bullfed is actually a genius. I mean, what I would say is, Mitchell Johnson and Steve Harmison, who I've got to know both a little bit, certainly I've known Harmy really well, but I spent a little bit of time with Mitch when we were producing his podcast and everything. You really do understand that, like, and I've talked to Mitch about this on the podcast, that we thought he was stupid, right? Like, that was the whole thing of, like, big dumb fast bowler, which is already a bad cliche. But now, and having talked to him about it, it's like his issue isn't being stupid. His issue is overthinking, right? There's too much going on in his head. And it wasn't till maybe towards the back end of his career that I worked that out. And I don't think everyone did. So I think when you get people like Morne Morkel or Steve Harmison or Mitchell Johnson, people just assume big dumb fast bowler, incredible athletes, whatever. And then you meet them and you're like, in some ways, I've never talked to Morne Morkel, so I don't know if he's in this camp. But the fact he's a bowling coach kind of makes me think he would be in this camp. More about bowling than some of the guys with all the skills. Because the guys who have all the skills can just do everything naturally. So, I'm hoping to speak to Richard Hadley for my bowling book. But I was talking to Jeremy Coney, and Jeremy said he's not particularly... There's some things he's very good about talking about, but it's not always that easy for him because he couldn't understand why everyone else couldn't do it. Whereas Steve Harmison spent his whole career trying to perfect each delivery because he didn't have those skills coming in. So there's a whole generation of fast bowlers I think we've completely misunderstood. And, once you get to talk to them and you get to understand them, that you get that. So those two guys, certainly who I've met, are very different. I mean, there's some others that are maybe... I don't want to be associated with slagging them off, but yeah, there's some people who are very popular with fans that I think if fans spent more time with them would not be very popular with fans. Or if they spent time with their personal rather than their public personas. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else though. There are some cricketers who are exactly like you think they will be. And there are others that go in a very different direction. Yeah. I mean, I think those big fast bowlers are the ones that I think are most misunderstood from that. Anyway. PJ says, Bob Massey and Narendra Hirwani both famously took 16 wickets each on Test debut, but together only played 23 matches. Hirwani took 66 wickets at 30 and 17 Test matches. Oh, okay. So you're basically asking, I did look at this actually before you did it. The other day. Now I've completely forgotten what I found. I think in Bob Massey's case, there is a bit of an overlap with that next generation of bowlers who were coming through, if I'm remembering that correctly. So Bob Massey's career, what's he about 65, 66? I want to say, when he starts. So at that stage, um, he's that's more of a weaker playing era for Australia, fast bowling wise. Whereas what by the mid 70s, you've got, well, certainly by the early 70s, you've got Lilly coming through. You've got Walker, you've got Pascoe, you've got Thompson. Some of these guys are later, and some of these guys are earlier. Um, when would Froggy Thompson have come through as well? Um, so there was a bunch of guys probably around his level, and I think, and I'm just spitballing here, but knowing what I know about Bob Massey's bowling, I would assume at that time that he was probably seen as a bit of a one-dimensional bowler, and that he was only new ball. And I think that if you look at Australian cricket, they're already moving beyond that quite a bit. Just having a look at the matches that he played in. Yeah, so Lilly actually takes more wickets in the matches that he plays in than Massey does, at roughly the same average. Um, but to be fair, there isn't really another seamer that plays all that much in that. But that would be my guess, that they just thought he was a bit one-dimensional. So if you look at the history of Australian bowling, I think that they're not looking for those new ball specialist bowls the way that other teams often do. Uh, and so you don't always end up with that kind of bowler. And if you look at the best case set, well, the nearest to him in terms of Australian cricket is probably Terry Alderman, who doesn't always play for Australia either, right? Very probably similar kind of bowler. Again, a swing bowler and everything else. So you have a situation there where he doesn't do it. Now with Hawani's a little bit different because he plays more matches, doesn't he? And so he, in his first test, his first year, he takes 36 wickets at 14. The next 2 years, he plays 10 test matches, and he takes 22 wickets at almost 60. And really, I think he has one decent test. Yeah, 1995 when he comes back. But by the time he comes back in 1995, Anil Kumble's playing. So now you have obviously a great spinner. So I think in that case, having the two leg spinners together is probably what did for Hawani as much as anything. But he clearly wasn't taking wickets. So if we just have a look, I just look at him by country very quickly. So in Asia, he takes 45 wickets at 16, and he averages basically 60 everywhere else, right? 55, if we're being a little bit more friendly to him. He really struggles to take any wicket. I think, yeah. And that's the issue with him. And I think if you compare him to Kumble, you probably get a lot more control with Kumble as Kumble starts to come through. They also would have had Venkatapati Raju coming through, so another fantastic bowler as well. And so that's the case. So, this does happen from time to time. You can be the wrong player at the wrong time. I think if, in Massey's case, if he comes along, but even then, I think Australia even by the World War One is moving away from sort of traditional bowlers. Australia always liked the extra pace and being able to either bowl short or bowl fast. And I think with Hawani's case again, there's just a little bit of overlap with other bowlers. Raju says, are the DRS projections adjusted for the Lord's slope? It's fairly pronounced slope, even on TV, and it's quite a unique ground in that aspect. I wonder how the marginal DRS projections decisions are affected by the slope. Yeah, they're calibrated to every individual ground and every individual pitch. So there are lots of wickets that are not 100% flat. Obviously Lord's is more than others, but there are all sorts of things. So if there was a test match, I think it was in India, where they didn't get a chance to calibrate the Hawkeye machines before the game because they took the covers off and played. Was that the New Zealand game? I can't remember if it was that game, but I remember it being a game over there. And so that's happened a couple of times now around the world. And that's because the Hawkeye actually needs to calibrate on each individual pitch and work out what it's doing. I don't know the full mathematics or the physics of how they do it, but it is specifically, it is individually done for each wicket. Neil says, a recent Financial Times article said that Reliance's Geo Hotstar now has almost 300 million subscribers, thanks partly to the IPL. However, the modestly priced subscription and advertising revenues being half of the broadcasting cost doesn't exactly make it profitable. This could mean potentially that the IPL is overvalued. What is the commercial benefit for Geo just beyond amassing customers on its platform and getting eyeballs? Are they banking on achieving an, how do you pronounce it? Oligopoly? I can't, oligopoly, okay, for stronger negotiating power and for getting better rights in the future. Look, I think it's the Ambanis. They can probably pay more in the future. I just think it's a different model, Neil, and I think we're so used to people buying it for the normal reason, right? Which is to make advertising money back off it or paid TV subscription off it. And they were very clear from the start that they were trying to get as many people as possible onto their platform. That, I don't know what, you'd have to go through the phone market and how often people change phone providers in India and how long they're tied up to, contracts and how all those things work. But the way that these things generally work is like, we don't paywall a lot of stuff, right? We put a lot of our stuff out for public for everyone to get to. We could make more money, I think, if we paywalled it in the short term, right? I'm pretty sure if I just put everything behind a paywall, we would actually make a lot of money, and there's a lot of people who'd like to pay for that. But we wouldn't grow, and in the long term, we wouldn't make as much money. So getting people on and getting them subscribing and having them, even occasionally coming in and out, and however they do that, is still a really good thing. And in this case, not only are you doing that, you're doing that with contracts, right? You now have a relationship with that customer. And I'm not an expert on this from a non-content side of things, but the big issue is getting new users, right? It's getting people to come over to you en masse. That company, Geo, is now worth a lot more money because of what they have done. I would assume in the future of cricket, we see this model a lot more, right? So yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. Neil says, oh, this is a long question. Found your conversation around player workloads to Tim more interesting, particularly comparing Goff and Anderson. I've long thought that international players over the past 5 years, particularly from top teams, generally have reduced workloads compared to previous generations. Yes, they've increased their amount of travel days, reduced their amount of playing days, is true. Far fewer turn out for domestic red ball cricket, fewer 5-day ODI tournaments, fewer 7-day ODI tennis. Remember those? They were crazy. More teams playing 5 bowlers with shorter tests. The IPL requires you to play only 14 games over 2 months. And yet all this talk around injuries. Okay, so this is something different. So in the old days, you had players who... So there are more injuries now in the NBA, even though there's more load management and resting than there used to be in the NBA. I'm pretty sure that the numbers would back that up. And the reason being now is when you're playing in the NBA, you are playing to almost your 100% max all the time. So in the old days, the great players would sometimes play like 46, 47 minutes of a game, right? Even 48 minutes was not that uncommon. Now, outside of a playoff game, that's really rare in the NBA, because why would you want your star player absolutely ground into the dust, right? And so it's the same as in the old days. You would get Joel Garner or Courtney Walsh playing in county cricket, right? But they have been very open, saying we were not bowling at 85, 90 miles an hour. We were bowling at sometimes 75 miles an hour, right? Because we were better than everyone else and we could come back. And the same thing would happen in test matches. You wouldn't always, go back and have a look at the amount of times people are walking runs in test matches, right? Have a look at how many times people just don't even try and attempt quick singles. How many times that people would chase the ball just in a leisurely way behind it. Test cricket is not played like that anymore. Like, you can't really get away with not chasing a ball hard to the boundary all the time. On top of that, running the first one hard used to be a thing that was said in hope, right? Now it's much more common. Like, people do that. Bowlers, when they bowl, are trying to bowl their maximum the time. So there is more strain on bodies. Like when you say there's 14 games over 2 months in the IPL, those players, and I'm talking about the fast bowlers here, but you could throw the batters, the spinners, everyone. Everyone is there's no coasting anymore. Everyone is putting themselves 100% in. That was not how cricket has been traditionally played. There have been players who have done that, but as a general sport, we never did that, right? It wasn't even on our minds to do that. And so that's how much the sport has changed. So instead of getting, you talking about the five bowler thing. The reason we have five bowlers is there used to be like a period where you would bowl Virender Sehwag or Carl Hooper or Nathan Astle and all these sorts of players, right? Who weren't really bowlers, right? They're not Vian Mulder or Colin de Grandhomme, right? Or I'm trying to think of another good one. There must be a spinning version of that. They're not those kinds of players at all. These are genuine bowlers. They might not be always top quality test bowlers, but they are genuine bowlers. Again, because teams realize that you can't just give up 8 overs of Paul Collingwood bowling, right? Or whoever it may be, Mike Hussey bowling, right? Rohit coming on for a couple of overs, whoever that player is. So cricket has gone from like a more of a casual cruising mode to a very much full on version of itself. That's going to take a lot of stuff out of these players, a lot more. And they train a lot harder. There were obviously players who used to train hard, but players are now, they're tested on their training, right? Like, as in, they've got all the things on. And I think it was Jimmy Anderson when the ECB started doing all that metrics. It was like, there's nowhere to hide anymore. Like, if I can't have a training session where I just kind of just come in and wobble the ball around and nick off, like, they know. And if they've asked me to train, I have to train at whatever 80%, 90%, 100%. Whereas that was not the case before, right? When I first started covering cricket, you would see bowlers turn up sometimes, and you could tell that they were like, I'm going to bowl about 24 balls. I'm going to do it over about an hour's time. I'm going to have lots of chats to bowling coaches and to journalists and whatever, and I'm going to bowl at about 60%. Right? Just that doesn't exist anymore. The game is so different now. Oh, let me just take a break here because, oh no, there we go. Ian says, Stuart Broad is a great example of a bowler who falls below the S tier but could produce unbelievable spells. 8 for 15, 6 for 22. We could go on. Who else are good examples of players below elite level who had the knack of extraordinary game-changing exploits? I suppose you'd throw Aiden Markram in that now as well. Like, he would be another one that we would put in there. VVS Laxman is someone who I would put in there. Is Freddie Flintoff maybe the S tier version of this? So I think there's plenty of those players. I mean, Faf du Plessis did some incredible things in Test cricket as well. I've never done it, but I would like to do a kind of a mental grading of some of these players. In fact, I think it was it Marina Hyde did a really interesting thing recently on Hollywood Stars, where she was basically, we say A-list for everyone, but A-list basically means you can open a movie and it's almost guaranteed to succeed, right? So there are lots of people that were A-list who are no longer A-list, and I think you could kind of do that. There are probably some players who are S-tier level in their prime, but their prime might only be 2 or 3 years. And they, like Gary Kirsten was probably never S-tier level, right? And I'm trying to think of a good South African version from his period. Whereas Daryl Cullinan's best was probably S-tier, right? But over the course of their career, Kirsten probably had a better career, all things considered, as an opening batter in South Africa than Cullinan does. But he never had that ability to play the kinds of innings that Cullinan does, right? Like, I think of Robin Smith is maybe another really good example of that, who had a really high level, and maybe Ramprakash is one of the most famous versions of that. Josh says, what would Rabada have to do to end up in the top tier along with Garner, Marshall, Hadley, McGrath, Stain? I think he has to. Well, he's been playing great against. He's been playing great against left-handers, so if he continues that for another 6 years, that's a huge step up. If you look at Garner and Marshall and Stain and McGrath, and I think Hadley, I put in this, they're also great in Asia as well as outside of Asia consistently. So there's no place where you think where you want to face them. And Rabada in Bangladesh has just picked that up recently. But let me just look at his overall numbers quickly to see if that falls in line. Where are we? So in Asia, yeah, he's averaging 25, whereas. So there's nowhere where he averages more than 20. He struggles a little bit in Australia and New Zealand, which is a bit odd. Struggles, averages 27. But if you compare his record to McGrath, because that's the level that you're looking at putting him into, let's have a look at what McGrath's numbers are on the same. So McGrath doesn't average over 23 everywhere. And Asia, he takes 72 wickets at 23. So Stain would be a little bit different because I think Stain struggled in England. So I don't think Rabada's. I think it's this longevity as much as anything. He might be on the back end of that group rather. I don't think there's anyone in that group he can go past. What's his overall bowling average at the moment? 21.74. Considering he's played in a better bowling era than some of those guys, and Stain's maybe the main one I'm talking about there. But even McGrath bowled a lot in the 2000s, didn't he? I kind of want his average to be closer to the sort of the Bumrah level than it is at the moment. But it's 336 wickets at 21.74. Like I think he's already in that argument. He just might be on the back. He might be more in the Ambrose area of that argument, right? Who you haven't mentioned there, rather than at the other end. But yeah, I haven't done the full numbers on the bowlers yet, so I don't have a great answer for that at the moment. Roger says, can you make a reasonable all-time defensive left-arm finger spin 11? Jayasuriya, Jadeja, and Akshar could add a lot of flexibility. You'd have Ravi Shastri, Vettori. Who else are we going for? Do any of the England guys bat? Probably not. So you need. Is there a West Indian version? Well, you put Sobers in. So you've got Sobers, so that gives you a little bit more. And he can also take the new ball. And some of those left-arm finger spinners are also former batters, aren't they? So yeah, I think you can make a pretty interesting side. Was Vinu Mankat a left-arm finger spinner as well? He was, wasn't he? Can't look at it. I don't think. I'd have to go into my database. Because there must be more. If you've got Shastri and Vettori, you've got Akshar, you've got Jadeja, you've got Sobers. Oh, Shakib. I knew I was missing one other major one. So Shakib gives you heaps as well, doesn't he? So there should be. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with left arm finger spin, by the way. When I do my bowling book, there's going to be a whole kind of chapter on it. I'm trying to remember what. I don't think Underwood could bat all that much, could he? So he maybe doesn't help you. I suppose Ashley Giles, if you needed a number 8 batter, but you might have enough. But yeah, Shakib, Vettori, Jadeja, Santner, Shastri, Sobers, Sanas. Did we say Sanas Jayasuriya? I met him as well. It's a pretty good team, isn't it? We're getting there. Do we count Darren Lehman as a left-arm finger spinner? Do you count Darren Lehman, Michael Clark type players? There must be someone else that bowled a little bit of left-arm fingers. Yuvraj? I know he's but yeah, I think you can have a fun team. Rahul says, when a batter gets out-strangled down the leg side, we often hear that this is unlucky. Why? Because there's only one person who can catch you there. Quite often the ball goes for 4 rather, I don't know what the percentage would be. The most you can have is one catching fielder there. So even if you consistently are hitting the ball down there, you're very unlikely to do it. Whereas if you do the same outside off stump, you could have 5 people catching. So it's unlucky. There are some technical reasons why certain players do it. There's head falling over. There's sometimes around hip or chest in the way that certain players play. But even then, it's unlucky just because there aren't, that you might get an innings where you get 10 bits of glove or inside edges and they all go for a boundary. It's very unlikely to get 10 edges outside off stump where the ball doesn't fly to one of the catching fielders. Like, it's very, very unlikely to have that happen. Whereas it's very likely to have that happen on the leg side. That's why they're unlucky and lucky. Person says, managed to make it to my first live in-person cricket match. How did Finn Allen get 151 off 51? So far, no one has gotten close in Oakland. Was it just his day, or there's some additional factors? Do you know, I've had a look at it a little bit. Look, the thing, but I don't have a great answer to your question. The thing with Finn Allen is he's got lots of flaws within his game, but I think once he gets the rhythm right and the tempo right, if the bowlers aren't bothering him, he can just sort of hit through the line consistently. And, he reminds me a lot of someone like Luke Ronke. Maybe not quite as consistent as Luke Ronke, but on the right pitch on the right day, just feels like they can hit everything for 4 and 6. It could just be that wicket is getting tired, or that was the best batting wicket of the lot too, as well. Ben says, is it fair to call modern seam bowling in tests boring? Compared to previous eras, there isn't as much variation. It's simply wobble ball, every ball. There might be a bouncer ploy, but that's usually after 50, 60 overs of wobble seam. There was a lot more variety. Probably the great period is the 90s, right? Where you have bouncers, back of a length, swing bowling, seam bowling, reverse swing. That's like the best combination that we've ever had. But if you remember back in the 90s, and I watched a lot of cricket back then, Ben, there was a lot of bowlers bowling really defensively outside off stump. That channel outside off stump. So there's always been one thing that is quite boring or repetitive about test bowling. Like, it's kind of how it works as a skill, right? But there's less diversity in what we are seeing at test cricket now than we've seen maybe in any period. This is what I don't think people understand. The reason I'm talking about the wobble ball is because you're getting 3 and 4 bowlers in one lineup bowling it, and it's so pervasive. I was having a talk with Aaron Briggs about this online, and he was saying, you keep going back to the wobble. There are all these other factors. And I said, yeah, but we've never had a delivery. So if you compare it to the wrong is the last big change in bowling, right? South Africa have 4 wrong bowlers. They can't even get them all to bowl, right? Because there's too many of them in the side, and you still need seamers, right? And so most teams have 1 wrong bowler, or maybe 2 wrong bowlers. You can have a lineup now where you might have 5 wobble ball bowlers, right? Like, that is a legitimate option that teams will be looking at. That is such a change to our game. And so it is a bit one dimensional. And, there will also be a blowback, because I think that as the wobble ball gets more and more common in lower levels of cricket, people will not grow up facing as much swing bowling as they used to. So I think that swing bowling will eventually swing back into fashion, just because people won't be as good at playing it in the future. But over the next little while, we have to understand that the wobble ball's magic is really that it is the first ball outside of maybe what left arm finger spinners can do, where you are keeping LBW bowled, caught behind, caught at slip, all in play at the same time. And it's really hard to do that with an outswinger, because the minute you try and pitch the outswinger on middle and leg stump, sometimes it just doesn't come back. It just doesn't swing back anymore. And that's the magic ball. Whereas the wobble ball's doing this every single delivery. So it's going to take a while for other people to do other things. But there will be other variations, right? There will be other methods that come through. I mean, you talk about the bouncer. We've never had as many bouncers probably bowled in Test cricket as we have now. So that is a big variation. And it wasn't that long ago that everyone wanted to be Neil Wagner, and now everyone wants to be Muhammad Asif. Lemon says, is Steve Smith underrated in tests? You have him as well within the top 10 best batters of all time, and yet in Australia it feels like even Ricky Ponting is rated higher than him. Yeah, I don't get this at all, Lemon. I love Ricky Ponting. Ricky Ponting was the batter of my generation, right? Like, as in, I grew up watching Ricky Ponting play. I have absolutely nothing but admiration for him. Steve Smith has been a better test batter. He, the one thing I would give Ponting is the impact of his innings are sometimes more violent and quicker, which is something that I definitely wanted to high player anyway. Like, I don't think he was a player who was that drastic with it, but he had the ability to change momentum. But he also played behind some great opening batters. Like, Australia couldn't even fit like Martin Love and Matthew Elliott and Jamie Cox and Di Venuto and Slater and all these different guys. Hayden were not always in the side. Like, he played behind some very good players. Smith hasn't always had that, right? Smith has had a much harder bowling era. Ponting did it in a way better batting era, right? And that's hard. Not everyone can get their heads around that stuff, right? That not everyone knows that. I think Ponting was just a more enjoyable player to watch as well. Aesthetically, who would you rather watch? Ponting was way more fun to watch than Smith. So I think there's an element of all that. I think the sandpaper thing plays a part. And I also don't think that, I think Ponting was a representation of what a lot of Australian men wanted to be. Brash, aggressive, arrogant, stylish, right? And Stephen Smith is, a neurodiverse dream, right? Like a completely different kind of human being. Like, he's got the tics and he's got the, the weird way of talking to people and conversing while he's batting and everything. It's just not as cool, is he? Right? Like, so I think that's a part. There's nothing within their records that suggests Smith is not better than Ponting. And, I've had some people complain to me about that in the book, a couple of Australians recently. I was like, go through it line by line and then come back. And no one has. I just don't think you can make a solid argument that Ponting was a better test player. But if Ponting had an incredible peak, but it's still not as good as Smith's. Rob, it's not a body shaming question, but it seems like a few players are carrying a bit of extra weight. Is it just more noticeable because of the skin tight shirts, and this is historically normal build for batters, or accentuated because of the ultra athletes like Faf and Kohli? Yeah, we still don't know what the ideal batting athlete is. I looked at baseball. I think baseball is a really interesting one because they realize that there are different bodies for different positions, and we haven't got there in cricket because we have a more of a flexible, we don't have one fielder in one position. So it is very different in cricket. I get that. But I always look back to when I was massively overweight. I found hitting sixes so much easier. I find that's probably going to be pretty similar with everyone. We do need great runners between wickets, though. We do need other kinds of athletes. But yeah, I just think that the shirts have changed, and that's probably what you're picking up. I would say cricketers now are thinner than they have ever been, and certainly fitter than they've ever been. But the old shirts certainly allowed you to get away with things in a way that it's really hard with the modern kit. I find that like some of the shirts that I buy, like the sizing is so weird. Like, as in they're shaped to be sort of gripping your body, that even when I'm wearing the right size, sometimes they don't feel the right size. I can't remember if it's my Gujarat shirt. It's one of my shirts where I'm like, this is definitely the right size for me, but it's still not 100% correct. Sandeep says, how are feature riders not ball by ball paid? What's a ball by ball writer? I think you've confused yourself a little bit here. Yeah, I think you misunderstood. There's no such thing as that. There's no one that I'm aware of that works in cricket who is a feature writer that doesn't do also match commentary of some sort. There might be some newspaper guys who have columns. They would be columnists, so that is different again. I can't think of anyone else whose job it is to just write feature pieces, because they would still be writing them based on the matches. So say someone like Shield Berry from the Telegraph, he's writing feature-ish pieces, but he writes some of those when there's no games on, and some of those when there are games on, and the ones that when there are games on, he's supposed to tie into the game. So there's columnists who just write columns, and they will have one column a week that they need to write, which is dying a little bit, but that used to be traditionally how it was done. You then have people who do match reports and press conferences. So that's probably the most common form of cricket writing. Then you will get more of that sort of other side of it, which is probably and you get some people who do a combination of match reports and features. As I said, that sort of Shield Berry side of things. I don't think there's anyone who just writes features who's working as a day-by-day cricket journalist that I'm aware of. I mean, you have people like, I don't know, magazine writers that might do that. So maybe a Phil Walker would be someone who would be doing that. Trying to think if there's anyone in outside of that in other countries. I don't think there would be many people. So there might be a couple of people who work, Phil Walker. I don't know what John Houghton's situation is, but if John Houghton had a contract with someone, he might be like that. But yeah, that would only be magazine people. So most feature writers, if you look at someone like John Houghton, and he would probably just offer pieces up. I'm trying to think if there's anyone in India that would do that anymore. It's kind of like a lot of low-end journalists who do that, who they might come up with a piece and they would contact Cricinfo, Cricbars, maybe a magazine, a newspaper, and say, I've got this there. But yeah, I don't really know how to answer. I think people really misunderstand is. So if you've got someone like Fidel Fernando, who's obviously a feature writer by talent, but there's no way that Cricinfo would keep him if he wasn't also doing match-related pieces, right? Unless he's just got so famous that they can kind of keep him on, and then then he becomes more like a columnist anyway. You sort of change what you are at that point. You're not really much of a feature writer at that point. So when I worked for Cricinfo, I would write features, and then would write match reports that are sometimes more like features from the ground. And I was just paid as a normal staff member. I don't see why you would get paid if you're lucky enough to have a good contract. PJ says, how does Afghanistan seem to have a never-ending supply chain of talented young cricketers, especially spinners? Do we know anything at all about the structure of domestic cricket setup? I'm assuming that there is no school or academy cricket, but there is club cricket under their first-class competition. There's just lots of cricket is one way of putting it, but also there's lots of like shields and tournaments in Afghanistan. And I haven't covered this in a while, so I don't think it's changed. But that was my big thing, was every couple of weeks someone would put on a new tournament or a thing. And so the talented cricketers would kind of travel there. But obviously there'd be a lot of local cricketers from that area as well. And then there'd be another one in a different region, another one in a different region. That's how I knew of it. I don't know if that's changed or anything has gone. But yeah, so it meant that players, it was kind of like how Sheffield, not Sheffield, it's kind of how the Melbourne and Sydney club scene used to exist at a point, except instead of it being club cricket, it meant that you would be playing against test players and first-class players regularly. And so you would be your skills would be tested against them so that the better players would come through. Whereas, most first-class players don't play a lot of club cricket anymore, right? Like there are certain countries where they do, but the vast majority do not do that anymore. And so it's a very different situation than you would have traditionally with that, right? Where you would have, even if you look at Bangladesh, right? Like Bangladesh is a good example of, Bangladesh didn't have a great first-class setup, but they had a very good club setup. And so quite often there would be Pakistani players and I think Indian players. I don't know if Sri Lankan players played in it, but they would go over there, and it meant that Bangladeshi club cricket was at a slightly higher level than it should have been because of that, right? So you had this situation where you are getting that sort of naturally happening all the way through. And if you go back to Irish cricket, weirdly enough, I'm picking all the newer test teams here, but if you go back to Irish cricket, it was a similar kind of thing where Ireland got really good at cricket when the what do they call it? The Green Tiger? Is that what it was called? But the Irish boom of software companies and all that sort of stuff. So they had tons of money in Ireland. And so suddenly they could afford to get really good players from South Africa and Australia and, Asia. And I don't know if many West Indian players went over, but certainly India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Australia, South Africa. I can't remember. Maybe a couple of Kiwis as well went over and played in Ireland. And so suddenly the level of club cricket went up, right? And that was the period. The next generation was when all the Irish players started coming through. Obviously, a lot of them went off to play in county cricket, but and it sort of changed how they started developing players. But yeah, so you can kind of, I don't want to say gerrymander it because it's the wrong way of pointing it, but you, as long as you've got younger players going up against quality players, they should, and you have lots of talent coming through, you should be able to develop them into high quality players, right? There will still be some missed because I don't think the Afghanistan system is obviously anywhere near perfect. Most cricket cultures are not perfect, so I can't imagine theirs would be. But yeah, I would assume that's where it all comes from, PJ. It's certainly based on the knowledge that I had the last time I looked it up. Let's get to some super chats here. He says, and then he's forgotten to do the other thing. Yeah, let's get to some super chats. And Unkanawa says, can Vic Kidd, Callaway Campbell take over Uzi for the Ashes? So obviously I'm a Victorian, so I've watched a bit of him play in some of the Shield games and everything. My big issue at the moment is, where are we? Callaway, Campbell Callaway. Where is he? He's got 1,600 runs in 30 games. He's got 200s. He's averaging 33, and he's got a strike rate of 39. So there's a couple of red flags here. He's only 22, so he hasn't developed yet. I think he's got a long way to go before he develops. My biggest issue is that it's a lot of games for only 200s, whereas he generally makes a 50, so he's not fully developed at the moment. And my second big issue is the strike rate of 39. It's a lot easier to block out in first class cricket than it is in any other level of cricket. So you do get players who can bat really, really slowly in first class cricket, and it's not as big of an issue. In test cricket, you have to be able to get off strike more. 39 is not a problem. 35, 37, 33, 32 can be. Because if you're playing the best bowlers in the world, the ability to get off strike regularly is really important. So I'd be much more comfortable with his record if it was 45, 47, even 42, 43, because then he can have a bit of a drop off. I expect him to bat slower in test cricket. And if he bats slower in test cricket, I think that's an issue for him. The plus side on all that is he's 22. So yeah, he's only made it, but he does get in a lot for Victoria. And so his low average is largely because he just hasn't converted in a lot. Let's assume that he overcomes that and he gets to be averaging around 38 to 40. Then I want to see the strike rate go up as well. That's the issue that I have at the moment. Why haven't Ratan's come? Oh, here it is. Ratan says, Ratan is really, really upset with me having Sachin ahead of Dravid. Dravid ahead of Sachin in players of spin. As I said, I don't think there's much between it, Ratan. Sachin doesn't have as good a record against spin as Dravid does. I think that a lot of Dravid's overall record is largely on the back of how well he played spin. I just let it go, dude. It's not that big a deal, right? Move on with our lives. It says, why does England team prefer change from hitting fours to hitting sixes? Because it's more runs? Is that what you're asking? It's 33% more runs off each ball. There was a big movement. So if you look at the England team when they first started playing in limited overs cricket under Brayshaw, I said Bayliss, and Owen Morgan, they had a lot of natural four hitters, sort of that next generation as they came through, and I, was encouraged to look for sixes to maximize their scoring options, which is, it was almost like they would try and combine what they were doing already with what the West Indies was doing. If you're going to take a risk, why not take a risk and hit the sixes? Because it's only 33% more runs, but 33% more runs, three balls in a row is 18 to 12, right? So I think there's an element of the way that England were thinking about that. And they were like, if, and this goes back to the West Indies thing, and I know that this was a discussion times within English cricket, was if you're going to take a if you're going to take a risk, why not take the ultimate risk? And look, not everyone thinks about life this way, right? But it's certainly the way that cricket was moving towards at that point. And I think they were really trying to do that. On top of that, they've got a new way of hitting the ball, which is very different to other people. If you actually look at a lot of the England batters, that sort of, they have like the power slice, like a golfer, which it's starting to get a bit more common in other cricket. But if you look at most people, when they hit the ball, they still hit it in that traditional cricket style. You know, it's really noticeable. Sri Lanka is the best one of this, and Bangladesh would be another one where when they hit the ball, they hit it in a really old school way. Whereas the England players are like sort of slicing through it and hitting it more like ice hockey or golf. And there's, I don't want to bore people with launch angles and all this sort of stuff, but there's many reasons why that works a little bit more. And so you're putting the power into, instead of hitting it up, which is kind of how we traditionally hit sixes, they're just powering through it. So there's an element of that that they've been looking at. And I know that the England players talk a lot about launch angle when they're trying to hit these balls. So there is a combination of golf, baseball, and ice hockey in their method. But yeah, a lot of it does come back to basic cricket as well, right? Like of the ways that they look at this. So it is very, very different in the way that people are trying to hit sixes now than they were in the old days. So in the old days, you didn't get situations like this all that much, right? It just wasn't the way that we used to play cricket. In the old days, you would have someone very much going on the front foot, putting their weight forward and everything else. And now we're waiting for the ball to be under our eye line in our sort of power base. And so it makes sense to go for sixes. And also the bats are better, the batters are better, the strength and condition, they're used to hitting sixes. It makes a lot of sense to try and do that and go all the way through and you know, swing the ball as hard as possible. Rat has just said, just on Callaway, last season there was a noticeable increase in strike rate from Callaway. Love it. I don't know if I can bring that up quickly and see if I can bring that up. How many Callaways are there? Can't be many, can they? Yeah, he's a player in development. So as I said, I think there's a few things with him. If you look at the way he plays, that he can go on. He's 22, so it's not as if that you need to make the decision now. Let's have a look. By year 2024. No, there wasn't a noticeable. Oh, well, yes, it was noticeable, but it went from it went from 30s. No, actually, wait a minute. Yeah, it went to 42. And he's been like that way another year as well. So I worry about younger players who find it hard to score. If he could keep it at 42, 43, I'd feel a little bit more confident going ahead. And he's had, I'm just having a look here. He's played in 4 cricket seasons where he's played more than 4 games. He's been at 34, 42, 38, and 43. So I wouldn't say it's a noticeable tick up. It's a small tick up. And he did make more runs this year. The one thing I would say is sometimes, especially with younger players who are fighting for their spot, although he's been around for a little while now, but that sometimes they, especially if they don't go on to make the big hundreds, they don't get the innings where they score a little bit quicker. But I think if you go through it all the way through, he's certainly not found a different way of going ahead and doing that. Just some other random ones here that I have to do. Microplastics added to the player's diet to reduce their performance. I just absolutely love that altogether. Saurav said, how did the Kamappa podcast come to life? So I'd been talking to a few different players, you know, from very, very famous players to far less known players than Robbie about doing that. I really wanted to do something with a player and with the coach. I've briefly done a podcast with Trent Woodhill and John Buchanan before, and I knew there was a lot to mine in it that I think I could help and they could help with. But you need the right person who wanted it. And, I won't go through the full list. I don't think I ever went to anyone specifically. But actually, that's not true. I did try and do some deals with some guys. But I needed the right person, and I could tell in the meetings that they weren't the right people for it. It's someone who wanted to do it, who loved podcasting. I know it sounds weird, but they don't need to do this. I'd seen Robbie talk about his depression, and I was like, well, this is a guy who's willing to actually be honest. And I'd seen him talking to some others, and we hadn't met, but I had friends in common. So I sent messages to a bunch of my friends going, what do you think? And I'd done that with other players as well. Occasionally they'd be like, oh, I don't know if this, and they were all like, I think you really like Robbie, and I think you get on really well. So I sent him a message. I had his number. He got back to me. The first phone call was terrible. Absolutely terrible, to the point where I was like, oh, this is a mistake. We have no chemistry, whatever. Turned out he was like on a plane or something. Robbie, don't answer your phone when you're on a plane. And so there was like a delay in the call. And he calls me back in half an hour, and we talked for like 45 minutes an hour. And it was just obvious that and we both wanted to give it a go. And, we're not like married to each other for the rest of our lives. We talked about it recently, and I was like, let's just keep doing it while we're having fun. Right. And we're enjoying it. And it's working for us professionally as well. Like, I've had heaps of partnerships with people, right? George DeBell, Sam Collins, Andy Zoltzman. I must have done stuff with other people as well. People who've helped me in many different ways with writing projects and all sorts of things. So I'm very, very used to partnering up with people, and then, your life changes and everything else. So we've kept it very, very casual. It works for both of us. We both really like doing it. We're going to continue to do it as long as we can until, Robbie says no, or, I retire, whatever comes first. But yeah, it's really, and, I like talking to people like that, finding Bayram, when we have Barat on the podcast, Estelle is another one. I can kind of tell pretty early on if I'm going to be able to do this with someone. Whether, as we said before, Rob Barron is another one, right? Where I can tell really early on. And if I find that with someone else, I would do it. And I've got some great relationships with some other cricketers as well. But I just know they don't want to be available, make themselves available once a week, right? And do the time and answer the questions properly, and not be in a bad mood, and, make sure that their social media team's doing the things that they should be doing, all those sorts of things. So Robbie's absolutely perfect, and we're really happy to be working with him. And let's take it as far as we can, and see how we go from there. That's it for us this week on now I was about to say Kimappa. Now I'm thinking about Kimappa. On Wagon Wheel podcast. We'll be back again next week. We've got heaps of podcasts this week. We've got a red inker on the tragedy in Bengaluru. We've got a tie-up with cricket by JB as well. I think Bayram and Varun are doing something. Plenty of podcasting content. And also, we've just done a video on the South Africa game, and the South Africa's chase, I should say. So definitely go and have a look at that as well. I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is Good Areas. Support us on Patreon. Say hi to your mum for us.